Disney is notorious for releasing sequels to almost all of their classic animated films, but there is one thing that they pretty much all have in common, and that is that they are never as good as the first one. In fact, some of them are so cringe that it almost dilutes the impact and magic of the first one. To have such an abysmal follow-up to some of the most significant animated films of all time is just plain sad and disappointing. But today, in my opinion, history was made because for the first time in over 25 years in Disney animation history, to clarify, this doesn't count Pixar, Disney managed to release a sequel that not only is just as good as the first one, but actually surpasses it in spades. And I couldn't be happier right now to report that. Now, I should say as a disclaimer that I never actually loved the entirety of the first Frozen movie. I still argue to this day that Tangled and Zootopia are far superior films in general. However, I loved elements of Frozen and a variety of scenes and character moments, especially anything involving Elsa. But overall, the first film was inconsistent and the pros were more or less on par with the cons. And I just rewatched Frozen again just a couple days before seeing the sequel, and I must say that the flaws were glaringly apparent, even more so. It's not a bad movie, but it's a far cry from being the best animated Disney movie of all time, as some have said. But I am so happy that we now have Frozen 2, which delivers the goods on so many levels. Like, seriously, I lost count the number of times this movie gave me chills. Pun partially intended. So let's break it down, but don't worry, this is a non-spoiler review. Let's get right to it and talk about our favorite queen and almost everyone's favorite Frozen character, including myself, and that is Elsa. Now, I don't even know how to begin to discuss this, but I'm gonna try. Now, for those of you like me who were disappointed at Elsa's lack of screen time in the first Frozen film, well, this movie is Disney's present to us, because this is undoubtedly her movie. Anna plays a big part for sure, but Elsa is given all the great moments, the best character development, and most visually stunning scenes, and not one, but two, yes, count them, two powerhouse song numbers. I heard someone say that if you're an Elsa fan, then you are not ready for what this film gives you. And I agree, because it's so overwhelmingly epic and fantastic that it's almost unbelievable. And I believe you genuinely have to see it to believe it. And if you can see it, it has to be on the big screen. Now, as for Elsa's songs, the first being Into the Unknown and the second being Show Yourself, I won't talk about Show Yourself because it's later in the movie and there's plot spoilers with it, so I can't talk about that right now. So we'll talk about Into the Unknown, and the question is, how does it compare to Let It Go? Well, from a visual standpoint, I do think Let It Go is stronger. Though the visuals in Into the Unknown are beautiful, and don't get me started on how good Elsa looks in Deep Fuchsia, you still can't beat the power displayed in Let It Go while she builds her ice castle. Also, I do think that the melody for Let It Go is just a snowflake catchier than Into the Unknown. That being said, I do feel that Into the Unknown is a bigger song than Let It Go from a message, vocal, and instrumental point of view. It just felt larger and more epic, so that's my opinion when comparing the two. And one final thing I'll say about Elsa is that she is given one of the best visual scenes ever showcased in all Disney movies. I'm talking a scene that is leagues beyond Let It Go in Frozen 1, and also a scene that is so powerful and rich, it's hard for me to find a scene in Disney history that beats it. Again, from a visual standpoint, I almost had an out-of-body experience watching it. It almost seemed too grand for any fairy tale Disney movie, but they went there. Now, as for Anna, who is my second favorite character of the movie, she is just as lovable and quirky as ever, and the beating heart of this movie is the relationship between the two sisters, undoubtedly. And Anna was arguably the main protagonist for the first film, and so it's only fitting that Elsa take more center stage this time, but that doesn't mean that Anna is sidelined by any means. She plays an equal part in moving this story along, and I absolutely loved her song in this movie. Also, for an animated character, there was one scene with Anna where she gives some of the best, if not the best, animated character acting I've ever seen. It's more of a dramatic moment, and the way the animators captured Anna's emotion with her eyes and expressions are just remarkable, and I was able to connect with her just as much as if it were a real-life actress on screen. As for Olaf, I'm pleased to report that he doesn't overstay his welcome, because for comedic cutesy characters like Olaf, for me, they run a very fine line between funny and annoying. And Olaf has a lot of screen time, so I was worried he would turn out to be the latter, but he is genuinely hilarious. He doesn't play for slapstick humor. He's not there to just appeal to little kids, and almost all of the jokes land very, very well. As for Kristoff, I will say that I really liked his new song and I found it hilarious, but he's definitely sidelined more so in the movie, and Anna and Elsa are given way more time to shine. He's not useless, but I also argue that the writers really don't know what to do with him half the time. So if you're a diehard Kristoff fan, you might be disappointed by this movie, at least with how they use him or don't use him, but maybe that's why they give him such a good song, to soften the blow of his lack of screen time and narrative importance. Now, this movie, from the get-go, marketed itself to be drastically darker than the first one, and darker it is, but darker in a way where it takes itself more seriously. The story is more layered and complex, and it's not afraid to show challenges or sorrow and touch upon slightly more mature subject matters. And this reminded me of Disney classics who also didn't shy away from darker elements and more complex or real character moments. Because to be honest, a lot of Disney animated movies after the 90s have been a lot more PC and have a tendency to sugarcoat things a lot more than they used to. So I'm glad that not only did Frozen 2 successfully market itself as a more mature and slightly darker sequel, but actually delivered on this, which resulted, in my opinion, in a richer story, better developed characters, better visuals, and more opportunities to connect with it on a deeper and emotional level. And finally, the last great thing I want to give this movie praise for is sticking the goddamn landing, because this is probably my greatest qualm with the first film, in that I felt the ending was rushed and wrapped up too conveniently in a way that made it feel cheap despite all the tension and build-up to it. But with this second movie, not only did it stick the landing, but it ended on such a high note that reminded me of epic endings we got in various Disney classics like Pocahontas, Lion King, or Aladdin. The type of ending that makes your heart soar and want to cheer when the credits start rolling. It was that good. Now, I will say there are a couple things that prevent this from being a perfect movie. The storyline could get a little complex for younger viewers, and there is a song or two I would skip. But without getting into spoilers, I would say that the biggest misstep was the introduction of the new characters towards the middle of the film. Specifically, the human characters they introduced. This was the only part in the movie that felt kind of rushed and needed a little bit more time to breathe or to get to know these characters before they are immediately intertwined with our main characters. And given how significant a part they play in the overall narrative as it progresses, I found it disappointing that we didn't get more with them in general. And given how fast-paced this movie is, I don't think 10 extra minutes would have hurt anybody, just to spend more time with these new faces. But overall, this movie excited me, and it lived up to the epicness that the trailers boasted it to have. And I loved that they explored the mythology, the history and origin of Elsa's powers, and answering many, many questions asked but not answered from the first movie. This almost felt like the intended story of Frozen and makes the first movie almost feel like a prologue. This movie reminds me of the Disney classics that we loved growing up. It provides some of the best visuals I've ever seen in any animated movie. It's not afraid to be more complicated and mature in its story. Sure, there are some pacing issues in the middle, some characters that were underutilized or underdeveloped, but unlike the first one, the pros here with Frozen 2 practically cancel out the cons. And there's no denying that Frozen 2, in my mind, is better and stronger than Frozen 1. And it gives me hope that Disney won't shy away from using complex and more mature elements in future animated films that remind me of the golden age of Disney animation just 25 years ago. Frozen 2 isn't quite as strong as Zootopia or Tangled, but it took us into the unknown and accomplished the impossible by standing out better and stronger than its predecessor in just about every way. I'm going to give Frozen 2 an A-. And that's my review for you. I'm curious to know what you think. Feel free to leave your thoughts and opinions down below. And thank you all again for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Ryan Bamey, signing off. Bye, everyone.